I want the video to reflect, to show, to not hide that it's a YouTube video. I don't want to make it fakely, like overly academic or so. It's on fucking social media, right? And that's obvious.
Hello, and welcome to Generación de Cristal. Now you may be wondering why the fuck I am speaking in this very bad English. Well, the reason is we have this wonderful guest now, Dr. Hans-Georg Moeller. Doctor, thank you.
Thank you.
Hans-Georg Moeller is professor of philosophy and religious studies at Macau University. He has two YouTube channels. One is called Carefree Wandering, where he talks about politics, identity, Luhmann, all sort of stuff. And the other is called
Philosophy in Motion.
Philosophy in Motion, yeah, where there is like these beautiful histories of the Zhuangzi, an ancient philosophy text, a Chinese philosophy text, that are animated, you know, and they explain to you the context, the possible meanings, interpretations, etc., etc. So, Professor, thank you for coming today. Now, I would like you to tell us a brief history of your academic formation. You know, like when you studied, how.
That's a long time ago. In the 1980s, I started doing Chinese studies in Germany at Bonn University in Western Germany. Bonn was the capital at the time. And I also studied philosophy as a minor. And then I graduated eventually in Chinese studies. But I had more like interest in philosophy. So eventually I got the chance, to make a long story short, to get a job at a philosophy department at a small university in Canada, Brock University. No one knows it outside of Canada, which is one of the few universities where they had a focus on Asian philosophy. So that's why I got in there, because I could teach Chinese philosophy there. And that was around the year 2000. And then I was in Canada for about 9 years in that department. Then I got the opportunity to go to Ireland, to also a small university, Cork, in the south of Ireland, University College Cork. And that was a similar thing. For whatever reason, the university decided they want to do Asian, non-Western philosophy, Chinese philosophy. So I was hired there. And then I was in Ireland for about 5 or 6 years. And then in 2015, I got the chance to go to Macau, China. And but Macau is very independent. Well, still, now it's getting less independent. But anyway, so since now 6 years, basically, I'm here in Macau, also doing philosophy. And of course, obviously, since my background is in Chinese studies and Chinese philosophy, here in Macau, in China, of course, that's why it makes sense for me to be here, because they do also Chinese philosophy, obviously. Yeah.
The Chinese language. Did you learn that in Germany or Canada or?
Yes, as I said, I did Chinese studies, and so I learned Chinese in Germany. But then I also spent 2 years in China from 1987 to 1989. I was studying in Shanghai, and I learned Chinese. But my Chinese is still not very good, even though I basically studied the language for now more than 30 years. So, but it's very difficult. So I don't feel comfortable speaking Chinese. Why I studied this was very popular. It was basically the exact opposite of today, right? Today, maybe China is the most hated country in the world, or has one of the, it's like all the reporting about China is very negative nowadays. And at that time, it was totally the contrary. China became very fashionable at the time. You know, after 1978, after Mao Zedong died, they had this opening policy, and they were opening up for globalization. And there was this, so there was a huge China fashion at the time. And so when I started Chinese studies in the previous year in Bonn University, there were 30 people who had enrolled. And then when I studied, there were 300. So from within 1 year, it had increased tenfold. And so that just shows that, you know, I was just basically following a general trend at the time.
recently, actually, I read that some universities, Chinese universities and cultural centers outside of China have been like targeted by the U.S. government. Like, it's like, why though?
What do you mean by targeted?
The U.S. government say that, you know, they are like communist infiltration centers, essentially.
Oh, you mean maybe the Confucius Institute?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that would be like unthinkable. People were like, "Oh my God, beautiful! This educational center, we're gonna go there." But now it's like, "Oh, terrible things."
Exactly. Yeah, that's one symptom of the general China scare right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of interesting. The only thing, I mean, everyone hates Trump if they are kind of on the left or half left, but everyone just follows Trump's anti-China politics, even if they're on the left, right? So if there's something in the West where there's an agreement on, then it's this kind of anti-China stance. I mean, I understand, and the things in China are getting worse, there's no doubt, and you can feel this here too, but generally,
How worse?
China is getting much more defensive. One example, of course, is the situation in Hong Kong, right?
Mm-hmm.
They perceived, rightly so, that Hong Kong was kind of on the verge of breaking up from China.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw it, and then they have all these countermeasures with a new, new laws that make it illegal to, basically say things against the Chinese government and things like this. So generally the political climate has become much more tense in recent years in China, and that's unfortunate. So
more nationalistic.
Much more nationalistic as a reaction to the Western kind of more aggressive stance towards China. So in turn, they become much more self-assertive.
How do you see like social philosophy or Chinese philosophers that talk about these issues?
Well, inside of China, both political and philosophical and generally socio-political discussions used to be very lively. I always experienced them as more diverse and more lively than actually in Europe or in Germany. There was but I'm saying this in the past tense, right? Because I'm not sure how the situation is nowadays. As I said, the situation has changed in the past 2 or 3 years, and people have to be more cautious about what they are saying. But prior to that, you can buy all kinds of books in the bookstores, and you have all kinds of Western philosophers going to China, and you have all these Chinese students going everywhere in the West. And it was a very diverse discussion where you had many, many different viewpoints being present at the same time. And there was very little government interference as long as you wouldn't directly challenge the government, right? As long as you wouldn't be calling for regime change or so. There was, particularly at the universities, there was a lot of freedom until very recently. But as I said, in recent years, and that's a very recent development, I'm talking about the past 1 or 2 years, it's getting more and more strict. Fortunately, not so much here in Macau, right? Macau is like Hong Kong. We have different government. We have a large degree of autonomy, and Chinese people actually need a visa to come here, and
really?
I cannot. Yes, so they have this one country, two systems thing, right? And so it has a very high degree. It has its own currency. It has its own legal system, and so forth, right? And right now at the Olympics, I mean, Macau is so small they have no athletes, but yeah. But Hong Kong is competing there under their own flag and as their own thing. So Macau does have it's very autonomous, but all this is now in a process of slowly changing, unfortunately, because of the developments in Hong Kong last year.
And do you see yourself in China in the next years?
If I will stay in China?
Yes. in the next
Yeah,
years?
I have to stay. I mean, I have my job here, and I hope I can, I hope to stay on for many years here. I like the place. As I said, my background is Chinese studies, and it's for me, it's a very good environment for someone who
Hmm.
does Chinese philosophy, and I like the city very much.
Yeah.
So, of course, I hope I will be able to stay here as long as possible. And I should maybe also mention that it's one of the richest places in the world. So it's a very
Mm.
comfortable place to live in. Unlike Mexico, there's basically no violent crime. So that's also, of course, increases the quality of living, right? It's a very safe place.
Well, that's a very low bar. Like any place is better than Mexico in that regard.
Hmm. Unfortunately, maybe that's so, yes.
Yes, well, I actually have read some people that say that you don't know what modernity is till you go to China. And you see all these great changes that outside China are weird or unthinkable. So I would like you to talk us about some of the things you have seen in that regard. Is this true? Is this...
I think that's absolutely true. And I mean, one of the misconceptions of China in the West is that they don't really recognize this, right? As I said, like I was in China for the first time in the 1980s when China just began to modernize. And of course, at that time, compared to Western standards, China was extremely poor. And it was still not compared like with still much better than India because you didn't have like you have in many other places. You didn't have whatever favelas, or you didn't have like mass poverty, you didn't have starvation, you didn't have crime, but generally the standard of living was compared with Europe, where I come from, very low, right? And then within a few decades, China extremely modernized. You go now, the most modern cities are now in China. If you go to Shanghai or so, and you feel like you're in a science fiction movie or something like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is not only just for a few rich people, right? It's like hundreds of millions of people who got like elevated from poverty levels, right? So it's amazing that a non-Western society, a formerly colonized society, mentioned to allow hundreds of millions of people to emerge from poverty and to basically catch up with Western living standards in such a short period of time. And so that is unprecedented in the world. And it also shows you, which I think is a good thing, how socialism can actually function, right? Of course, I mean, Chinese communism was changed then, and they have all this through, strong capitalist elements in the
Yes,
society,
yes.
but at the same time, unlike in the US or so, you still have all these you have public education for hundreds of millions of people. That is kind of top class now. You have like a top class world, which you don't have anywhere else, public transportation, right? I mean, you're talking about modernity. So you have these trains that run at like 350 kilometers per hour through the whole country. Like, it's amazing. You don't have that anywhere else in the world,
Yes.
right? And it's like affordable for the majority of the population, right?
Mm-hmm.
And other things like, that energy and banking and so forth, this is all still very much controlled in such a way that it benefits the general development of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And the party rule, they are especially even though, of course, there's also now a big gap between the rich and the poorer people, but still, it's very much the aim of the society. They call it a moderately prosperous society, and they
Mm-hmm.
did, eliminate poverty, and they raised probably the status of the poor people on a scale that has never really happened anywhere else in the world. Yeah, so that's also kind of an alternative modernity, right? And so maybe China is one of the few examples where you have a non-Western, formerly colonized country that was like economically extremely backwards, but was managed to catch up, and not just like you have in Mexico, where you have a very small class of rich people, right? So I think some of the
Right.
richest people in the world are also Mexican. But then you have like you have poverty and crime at an enormous extent, right? And that's simply not the case in China.
There's not so much crime in China.
There's also crime, but not much violent
As a
crime. And it's not a police state, right? It's not the case that, you have the street or everything is full of police or so. It's just generally the society has a lot of kind of cohesion, and it managed to develop in such a way that there wasn't really a need for a crime infrastructure to emerge, unlike in Mexico, right, where there are very specific reasons why why the crime and poverty are, of course, directly related.
Now, what you said about the police state, that's actually one of the misconceptions that outside China people have. Like people think China, they think like social credit, and you go to jail because you posted a Winnie the Pooh. So you would say that is completely false.
Well, it's not completely false, of course, and that's much more like in China. You have to be very careful what you say on social media or what you say online. That can easily get you into trouble. But at the same time, people say a lot of things. So it's not that people are quiet. It's very complex, the reality. But when I was talking about police state, I was talking about police presence in daily life, right? I felt, as I lived in Canada and the US for about 10 years, and I felt much more that I'm living in a police state there than I feel in China. Because, and in Mexico too, right? There's a lot of police presence on the road. There's a lot of things that are not really allowed. For instance, in the US or in Canada, you're not allowed to openly display a beer bottle on the road, right? But in China, people are very relaxed about these things, and you eat and drink outside, and it's not a problem. And so the general street life and so forth, right, and the daily life is relaxed is the wrong word, but it's not. And as I mentioned before we recorded, like the extreme opposite was Eastern Germany, where I was a teenager, where it's like you have the feeling you're entering a prison or something, right? And that's not really at all the case if you go to China, right? You do not have the feeling that you are that when you in your daily life that you are constantly kind of controlled and managed by the authorities. But again, like, it's complex. It doesn't mean that this kind of supervision of political opposition does take place, right? As I said, increasingly so recently.
Now, what would you recommend for people who want to know more about China, or maybe have some ideas about China? Like you said, you don't like Trump, would you like Trumpism? What would you recommend to those people to watch or to read to understand better?
That's a good question. I should have a little bit prepared for this because I'm very bad in remembering book titles. And there's a book called Did China Win? And the author is from Singapore and has a name that I cannot pronounce. That was a good book that I recently read about China. And then maybe just watch Chinese movies that are made by Chinese directors and that are not produced for Hollywood. Again, I'm terrible. If you had mentioned this before, I would have. I'm terrible at. I cannot memorize names of movie people, but China has a very good movie production. Just watch movies by Chinese directors that are not, as I said, produced directly for the American market, and then you get a much better picture on how contemporary China functions. And actually, now one documentary comes to mind. I think it's called American Factory. It was kind of produced with the help of President Obama at the time. And it's not directly about China. It's about how a Chinese company takes over an American company. And that's also a very interesting movie that kind of introduces, it's a documentary that introduces kind of the mutual misunderstandings between Chinese and in this case, Americans.
One of your book is called, well, I don't have the name, but it's about the Tao.
Genuine pretending.
Genuine pretending, exactly. What I'm interested in here is this concept. You also use it in your work about profilicity, about identity. So I would like you to talk us exactly how you went from Chinese philosophy and this to talking about identity.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Actually, the title Genuine Pretending is from my co-author, Paul D'Ambrosio, who used to be my PhD student, and that he wrote about this in his PhD thesis. And then later...
Is he Italian?
His name is Italian, his ancestors are Italian, but he's American. And then we later decided that we transform his PhD thesis into a book. So the term is originally from him, and I think the term is really, for me, this notion of genuine pretending, a key concept to understand what Taoist philosophy, or specifically the philosophy of the Zhuangzi, which this is specifically about, is about. One of the key ideas of Taoism is that, and this is maybe a metaphysical idea, is that everything is constantly involved in transformation. Right? Everything is constantly transforming, the transformation of things. And so this also concerns basically identity. So this basically means that we develop certain identities, we take on certain identities, we become who we are, but that this is not something that is substantial or essential or stays the same forever. And then whatever identities we develop or take on is of course also conditioned by the social and other circumstances we find ourselves in, by the environment within which we exist. And so basically the idea is that we adopt a certain form of identity, we become who we are on the basis of performing, for instance, performing a certain role, which is like in ancient Chinese society, which many traditional societies were like this, like family roles, for instance. That is the Confucian context, right? They were you would be who you are by being assigned a specific role in the family that you were born into, right? The roles like wife or mother or daughter or son or husband and so forth. So these would be identities that you were basically forced to adopt in society. And then Taoism kind of shows you that these identities are contingent. They are the effect of the environment within which you acquire this identity. And they are necessary performances that you need to, in one way or another, to follow along with in order to adopt an identity. But that this doesn't mean that this is kind of essentially, that this doesn't really essentially determine you. Yeah, that's the basic idea is this, that there is that this paradoxical idea that genuineness, being truly whatever one is the result of a certain performance, which in turn is contingent on the specific conditions within which you exist. And therefore it is transitory. So there is no such thing as a true self.
There's actually a song from a songwriter called Sophie that says, I'm real when I shop my face. The face is the face that I shop.
Yes, and this is under contemporary conditions, that is the case. Of course, in early China, there wasn't much shopping because it was a different society.
Now, I would like you to dwell more on this, because actually one of the greatest misunderstandings that I've seen about your theories and the Ambrosio theories are when you speak about profilicity specifically. Not all, but when you speak about profilicity, people are like, oh my God, yes, this is super fake. Instagram's super fake, bye. And there is like always this idea of fakeness. And there is this difficulty in grasping the paradox that you say about genuine pretending.
Right, exactly. right? That is the core idea, that genuineness is the result of a performance. Other examples for this are, for instance, let's say, in art or something like this, or in even more concretely, let's say in a family role, like a motherly role, right? To become a mother. You become a genuine mother by accepting this role and then performing this role and gradually learning and identifying more and more with this role. So it's not something that we are born, anyone is born a good mother, but you become a mother, or you exercise motherhood on the basis of somehow performing this role. And that is basically the same structure with any form of identity you develop. And in a similar sense, when we nowadays develop profiles, and we have to live according with these profiles. And in a similar way, nowadays we are forced to develop profiles of ourselves. This is now a technology that we use to develop and perform identity. And I don't think that is more or less fake in itself than other technologies of identity. For instance, the role-based identity of whatever, being a mother that I mentioned earlier. These are just technologies that allow us to develop a certain identity.
Now I'm really, I think that maybe our audience doesn't know this theory. So I would like you to explain very briefly, what do you mean by profilicity? What do you mean by authenticity? And also, how you and the Ambrosio developed this concept, like what?
So we use this concept, sincerity and authenticity, to start with. And these concepts are from this American scholar Lionel Trilling back in the 1970s. And sincerity simply just means, as I said earlier, a role-based identity, so that you sincerely commit to a role. And in traditional societies, I'm sure in Mexico, this is also still very strong, where this corresponds to family roles, but we were talking about organized crime or so, right? In these kind of contexts, it's also specific roles, and you have to be, commit to this role and fulfill this role. And there's a whole kind of ethos, a whole ethics of committing yourself fully to the values and virtues that are connected with a certain role, and that's sincerity. And so in religion, you have the same thing. You commit to a specific kind of role in a religious community, and this is sincerity. And that was a dominant model in basically all pre-modern societies, and still is also in societies like Mexico, many other societies, still very strong. Then we get to authenticity, which becomes in Western modernity very dominant, where there is the idea you have to find your true self, right? And whenever you commit to a role that is imposed on you by society, so instead of this, you have to find your true self, and you have to be really unique. You have to be different from everyone else. Right, so there is this quest for originality, for being unique. So if you're not really unique, if you're not really original, then it looks like you're lacking a specific identity. So that's authenticity, this idea that in order to be a person that I can really accept as fully as having a person, then they have to be somehow unique, original, and somehow express their inner self truly to me. So everything that they are socially has to be somehow a true representation of who they really are inside. So that's a very different model of identity. And now the basic idea is that we've moved on to a third model, namely the model of profilicity, where it's somewhat similar to sincerity, that now actually it's no longer the inside that determines, like in authenticity, the real self, but now it's that you construct a certain profile, that you project a certain image to the outside. And then as we do, for instance, on social media, right? Obviously. And then you have to be truly invested in this image. You have to basically fulfill the promise that this profile promises. Typical examples of this, maybe the best example is the brand, right? So for instance, in in the economy or so, right? Is everything like the businesses are developing brands, right? So whatever, Nike, right? It develops a certain profile, a certain image. It's not really about the actual quality of the shoe or of the shirt, but it's the development of this brand as some form of brand identity. And that is then is tested, is projected, and then there is feedback, and it's sort of acclaimed, and it's constantly reaffirmed. And then Nike is supposed to be somehow truly invested in this. And basically now, I mean, this is others have used this idea of kind of of personal branding and so forth, right? And we are forced in this way nowadays because in many ways authenticity is no longer really credible. There are lots of problems with authenticity. So we are basically forced to engage in constant self-branding and projecting images of ourselves and then somehow living up to these images. And this is how we achieve identity. So whatever, we have to develop somehow someone who is cool, and then we have to somehow live up to this. And people call this fake, and it is somehow fake from the perspective of authenticity. It is somehow fake, but all identities are somehow fake. As I said earlier, also the idea of motherhood and so forth are clearly socially constructed, right? They're also models that we just use to build up an identity. And again, authenticity is also deeply problematic. It leads to this kind of hyper-individualism of this quest for originality. Everyone tries to be unique and original. And that's also somehow fake because no one is really unique and original, right? To be the very claim to be unique and original is also inherently fake. So I don't think that Profilicity is by definition more or less fake than the others. In some ways, it has the advantage of over the others that its fakeness is more obvious. And because its fakeness is more obvious, it's less fake. And so like in the past, people would have like a family picture and everyone sits and is dressed according to their role, right? If you look at traditional photos, old photos, super old photos from the 19th century, everyone presents themselves in their social role with dress and so forth. And then, of course, then you have this idea that you have to, find someone in their authentic moment, like in modern photography, right? Where people try to find the authentic self that is so unique. Nowadays, people develop their profile pictures, which are clearly staged, right? When on Instagram and so forth, all the pictures nowadays are clearly staged, they are photoshopped and so forth. But we know that, right? And everyone knows that that these photos are somehow being staged for a certain purpose and so forth, that they are profile pictures. So in that sense, the profile identity and the profile picture, even though it's clearly staged, is somehow more honest because it communicates that it's being staged. It doesn't pretend authenticity. And therefore, it's in a weird way somehow less fake than the photo that pretends to be truly authentic. Because there is no such thing as an authentic photo of someone. You cannot photograph authenticity.
Now, I've noted you use the words paradigm, technology, speaking about identity. So I would like to know if there's is there any difference between the two, or they are the same in your vocabulary?
They're basically all mean the same. And I like technology. I think it also sounds more like sexy. But Paul didn't like it, so in the book we don't use it that often. But when I talk, then I like to talk about identity technology. But they basically all mean the same.
I actually like better technology because technology implies a certain amount of work to transform some raw materials into another thing. So
yes, exactly. Yes.
And what about the book? The book, you and your profile. How do you start writing it with the anuncio, the Ambrosio, pardon?
This is like it's our second jointly written book, and but we developed the book just simply through long conversations and just talking about it. And we decided to write the book. If you had a look at it, we tried to make it a little bit like entertaining. And so it basically consists of short sections where we talk about, things like whatever. We talk about certain events that happened, like whatever, this Jesse Smollett case. I don't know if you remember that.
Jesse Smollett.
Yeah. But so cases that were like in the world news, and but we start basically, so we have like little scenes, like short sections that are maybe like 2 or 3 pages long, which just are examples of how profilicity works in contemporary society, or in tourism, or again social media and so forth. Or like we described, for instance, our experience with Airbnb and Airbnb hosts. Right? Because Airbnb is a good example for how profile building works. The host has to build a profile, right? In order to be a successful Airbnb host, you have to invest a lot in building your profile as Airbnb host. But even the guests and so forth. So the whole kind of contemporary tourism is based on this kind of profilicity work. And so we give like a lot of examples from contemporary life, in order to explain how we've already switched in everyday life to this profile-based identity and how we interact with one another on a daily basis in that way. The Jesse Smollett thing is the same thing, right? Jesse Smollett was this black gay actor who basically faked a hate crime against himself. And that became somehow world news. First, because the hate crime was actually taken to be a hate crime. But then it came out that he only staged this hate crime in order to raise his profile. He actually wanted to get more money as an actor. That afterwards, and he wanted to raise his value as an actor, right? Because the value of, if you're like more known, then you can charge more for if you're like in a movie or something. And so that was a case of profile building gone wrong, right? And what we are saying is basically everyone does that. Everyone is a Jesse Smollett. We just don't do it with illegal
Jesus
means.
Christ.
Yeah. I mean, we don't do it with illegal means, right? We don't lie, but everyone is now under pressure. If you apply for a job, right, you have to hand in a CV, and you have to construct a profile of yourself. Of course, social media is a perfect example of this, but it's by no means only in social media. Dating apps are profile based,
and politics is completely
politics. Yes.
I remember something you said once, that it was like politics is no longer about politics, about profiles. Politics is about, like the army, those politics, other people. But the politicians don't do politics. I remember you said in an interview.
Absolutely, yes. Politics is also entirely changed to profile politics, right? It's a competition between different profiles. And we see this now also in America, like always, like the most important thing. I mean, there's not much difference between the actual policies of Biden and Trump, but the profile difference is immense. There's a huge profile difference, and people hate one another on both sides because they so strongly identify with the different profiles, which is kind of ridiculous because actually politically they're not even that far apart.
I remember when Trump was president and people were like, oh my God, kids in cages. But now it's like, well, they are not cages. They are detention centers for children. And Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, Naomi Klein, we also talk about her in the book, who wrote like 20 years ago, it's a long time ago, a very good No Logo, right?
No Logo.
Which is about logos, brands, right? And in marketing. But she already said that, of course, politics is basically following this model of marketing that consists in branding. And in the West, politics is basically branding politics, by the way, which makes it very different from China. And I think that's also one of the reasons I was thinking about this in recent weeks more and more. Why is particularly America now? I mean, Biden is as much as anti-China as Trump is. And I think one of the reasons is because China actually does real politics. They do still. The government is actually, they don't have a competitor, right? They're not in a profile competition within China, so they justify themselves, right? The Chinese government also has, which Westerners often do not know, they have, like Putin has in Russia, they have very high approval ratings, much higher than the governments in the West. Right. And of course, the main reason for this is what I mentioned earlier, that the government did a relatively, or actually not only relatively, did a very good job in raising the living standards of the population. So that unlike in most other countries, the younger people have much more opportunities than the older people, because a big problem in the West is that the younger people don't really have any opportunities or good opportunities in society, and particularly not better opportunities than the older generation. So in somehow the West is in decline, but the West still have to sell itself in particular to its own people as a success story, right? And so the American politics, against the facts, has to sell itself as the best country in the world, as a political success story, which actually speaking is a very dubious claim, given the poverty, the crime, the injustice, the wars, right? It's ridiculous.
Yes.
It's not a great record that they have. And particularly if you see the development in the past 30, 40 years, where the income has declined for large segments of the society,
yes.
right? Not only the poor are getting poorer, also the middle class is getting significantly poorer. So the system isn't really working greatly. Again, but they're not making politics. And they're just still and they win on profile building an election. Now in China, it's different. They don't have elections, so they don't have to. They don't have to engage in that kind of legitimacy building. The legitimacy of the Chinese government is built by delivering politics that somehow make the people accept an authoritarian government. That is their task. The government is authoritarian. No one likes an authoritarian government, right? The government makes human rights violations and so forth, and yet the people are willing to accept that and approve of it to a certain extent. Why is that? Because they actually make politics that benefit large parts of the population, unlike in the US. So it's kind of absurd that a government like China, in order to, which it also needs to maintain and achieve like support from the people, needs to actually make politics, right? That's the only way in which they can kind of justify their authoritarian, to a certain extent, repressive system, because they deliver. And that's why people are willing to put up with it.
So you would say
in the West, it's the opposite. In the West, it's the opposite. They don't deliver, but they are very good in creating a successful profile.
So you would say that in China, the profile of the government's profile, is backed up by these improvements in life, etc., and in the US, in Europe, the profile of the government's profile is backed up not by that, but by nothing.
No, by giving the people, it's like Naomi Klein said, it's basically successful branding. This functions like a brand, and it functions in competition with another brand. So people are just happy that Biden wins the election, and that kind of confirms their self-image and so forth. It's like whatever. It's like the one football team against the other football team. You gain a certain identity boost from having won the championship, like having won the election or so. Or if you're in the losing end, then it's like this constant kind of a competition that gets people identified with and that's what politics does, right? It offers different identification options that, like in football, don't really go along with big differences in substance.
Yes, actually, I wanted to talk now about wokeism. And now you talk about Smollett and politics. Two things. First, I was watching your video, and I was actually surprised because it's the first non-right-wing analysis of wokeism that makes kind of sense. So it looked interesting. And the second thing is something you say, wokeism has taken over the Western world. I wanted to ask you if you don't think it's a little exaggerated. Like I can understand that, for example, in academia, in some places, there is a lot of wokeism, you know, it's like all your life. But outside of that, with normal people, do you believe that there is wokeism there, or?
Good question. To the first one, thanks for the compliment, but I'm by no means the first one who is not right-wing, who has a critical view of wokeism. Like Zizek, for instance, who I mentioned actually in the description of the video, like one of the most famous left-wing intellectuals, right? More or less at the same day when I published this video, he had like a short essay, also saying very similar things as that I say in the video. And then you have Noam Chomsky, obviously, right, who's very critical of identity politics. And then you have, I refer to others also, left-wing writers, particularly if they come from a Marxist kind of background. They come up with the argument that wokeism is basically, and I take this from the American intellectual Adolf Reed Jr., is a left wing of neoliberalism. In fact, I think most people who are like more on the left than the mainstream are critical towards wokeism. And I think that's very important to recognize. And I think that's very necessary if there's any chance for a future for revival of the left. Then they need to be critical towards this kind of neoliberal wing of leftism, because like Biden and the American Democrats are not left. I was just recently, just a few days ago, Biden said in some interview that, and that has to do with Cuba, that not only communism has failed, but socialism too has failed. So he was basically saying, Bernie Sanders, I made some concessions during the election, but of course I have socialism and everything Bernie Sanders, even where he wanted to go, that is not an option at all for America, right? So and so really I think wokeism in many ways is just an excuse so that they don't have to do anything that would be actually real leftist policies. And many people have said that's why this is a kind of the window dressing for neoliberal politics. And I think that's a major function of wokeism that can be very clearly seen.
Like with Cuba, I actually was watching some people that were like, well, but the Cuban government is evil because they hate black people. Even if like BLM said, well, we should get our hand off Cuba, you know, BLM, you know, like, and people were like, oh no, but Cuba is a white supremacist state, and it was like so weird. No, it was like you wanna bomb these people because of this shit, or like when they were going against, I think, Iran, and Trump from all people said something like, well, in Iran they hang gays, and it's like, bitch, you're worse than that. And Trump was like, oh, I'm gonna bomb Iran for the gays.
Yes, to liberate the gays, sure. Well, and then the second point you make is very well taken. I fully agree with you there. Of course, wokeism is many parts of the world, in Russia too. Also, it's not really in Eastern Europe as well, and I suppose as well, like in Mexico, where there's still a very large conservative religious population, right? They're not really into wokeism. But in North America and in Europe, where these traditional religions are basically no longer really followed and traditional society has broken up, wokeism steps in and takes over this function, right? It takes over an almost religious function. And that's why I also like the term, even though, as critics rightly say, that it's mostly used by the right. But I like the term more than political correctness or other older terms, because it points to this kind of religious aspect of it. And so it's kind of the new age religion, that civil religion, that in some parts of the world, but very rich parts of the world and kind of dominant parts of the world, this has become something like an increasingly dominant new religion. But I fully agree with you. The point you're making is very valid. That's by no means the case everywhere. And even in the US, right, it's kind of 50-50. So, yeah, I agree with you.
Actually, now when you're talking about this, do you see any way in which Profilicity could be used to further a leftist organization or a leftist agenda outside of China? Or how do you see that? Because almost every time you speak about Profilicity and politics is like, well, this is shit. Wokeism, this brand, government. So do you see any opportunity about this? Or it would be better to return to a sincerity model? Because, for example, as you rightly say, all socialist, Marxist parties were more like, well, this is our class and our interest, blah, 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 blah. But nowadays, people don't identify with that.
Yes.
They completely disregard, like even in outside of the US and places like that, in Mexico, this happens too. I've met a lot of people, for example, LGBT people, poor people, that they don't see themselves as they vote for right-wing parties, and you ask them, yes, why would you vote for them? And it's like, well, they speak good in camera.
I mean, I don't have a good answer to this. I think it's an excellent point you bring up, and I don't really know how to do this, right? It's basically impossible to do leftist politics in the age of Profilicity, because everything is just, everyone is populist, right? Everyone, and you can only really win an election and so forth by, so somehow Profilicity, and this is maybe bad, signals the end of traditional politics. And that's maybe, and that's maybe why politics, where you have, at least to a certain extent, but only maybe 20%, some form of leftist politics in China or so forth, right? Where, as I said, there's still a significant extent of socialism actually implied, very successfully, right? But that's just politically, and it's not being, once you get into Profilicity, it's very difficult. But because then it just becomes like a sort of politics becomes a show, right? It becomes entertainment. It becomes somehow depoliticized, and so it's a good question. I don't have an answer to this question. I think it's a major problem. How can politics at all still be done when we move up to like total Profilicity?
Me and my friends and people I know, we say, well, let's gonna make a meme page for leftist memes, and you make like the meme of, the bourgeoisie, let's put some head, blah, blah, blah. And everything's fine, or feminist friends who do the same thing. And it's like fine and dandy, but then things become just a spectacle, like you like the meme because it's fun.
Yes,
and I see this actually happens also in YouTube, for example, when you talked about Philosophy Tube, that she gives more importance to her appearance on the screen, and building her profile, than to the actual argument, which is actually something that happens a lot in RedTube, and in woke circles. Like it's better to build this profile than to really think what you are saying.
I fully agree. Yes, that's a big problem, and it's I don't see really a solution to it, right? Because the way the whole thing is set up, particularly in politics through elections, it's basically impossible to make politics. you have to invest everything into profile building.
That's a bad thing. But now that we were talking about Philosophy Tube, I would wish you talk us about your two channels, Carefree Wandering and Philosophy in Motion. Like how did it start?
Philosophy in Motion was originally like basically my idea, because I do Taoist philosophy and I do this text Zhuangzi, and the Zhuangzi is full of stories. And these stories lend themselves to animation. And then I was fortunate enough to find good animators. And so we just animated these stories and discussed them and showed in which different ways they can be interpreted in short videos, like a little more than 10 minutes each video. And I also did this because I got more and more frustrated with academic writing in Chinese philosophy, and I thought this is not really a medium through which doesn't really work. You don't really reach a lot of people, and so this channel is kind of modestly successful. It's not super successful. Each video has like a few thousand views, which is there are much more popular videos out there on Taoism. But it's okay, and I'm still very happy with this co-production with these people who animate the videos, and I think the videos are I'm not only do I have like enjoy making them, but I also think I'm happy with the quality of the videos, and I'm glad I made this decision rather than writing academic papers or an academic book to choose this genre and to make it a cooperative project with other people who do the animations and so forth. And I invite people to watch it. I hope you will have fun, and I think it's a good way to understand more about Taoist philosophy. Now, the other one was initiated by one of my local students here, this Carefree Wandering, and he basically said, "Why don't we do this?" And I never thought that it would get any views, and so it was like totally coincidental. You mentioned this about this very successful philosophy tube channel, and then we made that was how, to give you the concrete example. I was teaching Kant, the philosopher Immanuel Kant, and for the first class I wanted to show a video. And then I checked YouTube, and then I had never watched Philosophy Tube. I didn't know about this channel. And then the first thing comes up is their channel, 5 minutes introduction to Kant, old video, like several years old.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, this is like wrong. This is so bad. How can this be out there? And then I showed it in the class. And said, look, this is a problem. There's like 3 or 4 problems in the video. And I didn't, and then the student came to me and said, hey, we should make this into a video. We should put this on YouTube, right? And then we did this. And then the next day after he had published this, the presenter of Philosophy Tube, Abigail Thorne, came out as trans. And that was a huge event on YouTube. And then through the algorithm, our video got promoted. And then a few after that, we made a video about her coming out. And then, so we are basically, we profited our channel, that our channel is well known, is due to Abigail Thorne coming out as a trans woman.
Actually, the first video of yours I saw was that video.
Yes, and then of course it's all through the algorithm, right? This is you have to get lucky with the algorithm in order to get, and you have to know how to kind of play the algorithm, which I have no knowledge about at all, but my student has a little bit knowledge about that. And then that's again profile, right? You have to somehow develop a profile of the video in this case that is liked by the algorithm, and then that the algorithm pushes the kind of profile, and then you build up your own profile through this. So that's how that Carefree Wandering channel got kind of promoted, and now it's kind of doing kind of well. Then by far, like this Abigail Thorne thing, it has like a few 100,000 views or so, and the others just have have much less views.
And what's your
for you too? It would have been much better. You would have invited Abigail Thorne to your show than me. But maybe she wouldn't have agreed. I don't know. You could try. Maybe she will.
I could try. But yeah, it will be fun. Her and ContraPoints. Do you know her channel?
I watched only one video by her, which I liked, and that's a long time ago. And I'm not very good at following YouTube. And I watched only one video by her, which I liked, but I didn't really follow up. Sorry.
What video?
See, I'm so bad. It's like a year or two ago. It was very funny. I forgot but which one.
Jordan Peterson?
No. It was something else.
I don't know.
I'm gonna come up with a Jordan Peterson too. It's gonna be my
yes.
next one. Yes. But that's again like a thing, right? How you that's good for the algorithm.
The polemic videos.
Yes.
Yeah,
I try not to be polemic. I'm not. I have no intention to be polemic.
No, but for the very nature of YouTube, people get very weird. For example, in our channel, we made a video about Paraguay. We interviewed a Paraguay woman who speaks Guarani, and she was telling us about problems in Paraguay. They have like this linguistic discrimination against Guarani speakers and so on. And the video actually is pretty successful. Like a lot of Paraguayans came to essentially say we are not racist, and then they tell me like racist insults, essentially like fucking beaner, and I was like, oh great, but it's a famous video, relatively speaking. And other thing I've seen is that people get really invested in these profiles, in these parasocial relationships. That the profile is easier to make a parasocial relationship with than with other kinds of identities. I think, for example, with the Queen Victoria of England, for example, you had a parasocial relationship with her that was sincere, but it wasn't that strong. They had songs for her and they made speeches for her, and she never saw any of that. But there was like this relationship. But now you have like the royal family that have these profiles, and people like love them. People treat them like weird. That's another thing of Profilicity, that it's profitable, but it's also weird.
But again, it allows us to see the weirdness. I think the traditional, and that's a good thing, right? The traditional things were also super weird, right? Just think about, again, like traditional family life and so forth. And we take it not to be weird, but it's also very weird, right? That's why I use this picture of the Chinese family with like the woman with the bound feet. Because of their identity, women would, cripple their feet for hundreds of years. And that was regarded as just a normal thing to do. And because it was tied into the role identity. And so I think all identity technologies do something weird, which like whatever religion is super weird. Catholicism, right? What could be more weird than that? What people do. But we don't, then with sincerity, with sincere commitment to it, all these religious practices no longer seem weird. And at least with Profilicity, the kind of the weirdness becomes somehow more obvious.
And that is actually, I think, permitted by the second order observation.
Right.
I would like actually to speak you a little bit about second order observation, so the viewers can know a little bit about that concept.
Yes, that term comes from the German sociologist Niklas Luhmann, and it's an important term for him. And he says, social second order observation always existed, but it's specifically prevalent today. And again, I think I found a good example of this is the brand in the economy, right? Traditionally, people would buy shoes, would buy salt, they would buy whatever, milk, right? And now they buy no longer shoes, but they buy Nike. They no longer buy milk. I don't know what the milk brands are in Mexico. It's basically everything we buy now is we buy the brand, right? So we switched from just looking at the thing and okay, this is a shoe. Now we see this is a Nike shoe, right? So we see already the shoe as it is being seen. It's impossible to simply see a shoe anymore. You cannot see a shoe. You always see how the shoe is being seen via the brand or something. And that's a switch from first to second order observation. That's very obvious with the switch from, let's say, the thing to the brand in marketing. And again, I think similarly, we talked about this, the same switch has also happened in politics, which causes the problem that we were discussing earlier. How can you have real politics? It's basically impossible when you live in a world of second order observation, just as you cannot really see a shoe anymore. So because you always observe something as it is already being observed. And of course, this is the case like with all things, like whatever. And now it's increasingly so. It has been recently become so with universities. I don't know if that's also the case in Mexico. But when I went to university in Germany in the 1980s, the universities basically just had the name of the town where the university was, right? And so I went to Bonn University, right? And it was just the university that was somehow nearby, and then you would go there, right? Now, nowadays, universities are all ranked and rated. So people are super concerned about the ranking of that university. So they look at how the university is being ranked, how it is being seen. So you don't just look at the university, but you look at the profile of the university, at the brand of the university. It's impossible to not do that. And again, if you now, before you watch a movie or before you go to a restaurant, you look at the ratings or rankings of that movie. So you see not just first order observation something, but the first order observation is directed, is guided, is oriented by the second order observation by observing how it is being observed. And then I give you another example for this. It's TV shows like American Idol or so, right? Where you're not only seeing just a singer or a performer, but you're seeing in the show how the performer is observed. And the observation of the performer becomes the prime observation. That you look at the second order observation and then judge the singer in terms of, you learn how to watch something in the mode of second order observation. So I think these talent shows, I think Mexico must have probably something similar, right?
Yes, they are terrible.
Yeah, but then they are training people in second order observation.
Now, I would like you to speak about the difference between academia and YouTube and the second order observation. In both cases, second order observation is very important. Now, something I've seen being in academia and being in YouTube is that both have like good parameters and bad parameters. But there's also a lot of profiles that is backed up by just a brand. This happens in YouTube and this happens in academia also. So I would like you to speak a little bit about.
I mean, now I'm operating also in both spheres, right? I'm teaching at the university and writing academic papers still, though I don't have that much time at the moment because I'm doing too much on social media. As you say, second order observation is working in both systems, and can't really add much to that. Generally, I think I'm not against philosophy being made on social media, and I'm doing it myself, right? And I'm not particularly interested in defending academic philosophy. I think academic philosophy in many ways is not only boring, but also it's very narrow-minded, and it's not something where kind of philosophy has in any way its natural home, right? I mean, look at the history of philosophy. Academic philosophy is a very recent development, and it developed in the context of, well, the development of the modern university, and it is subject to this. And now the university is increasingly being commodified, so it has a lot to do with that as well. And so I don't think that a kind of academic philosophy is in any way more philosophical or more genuinely philosophical than social media philosophy. I do not think that. This being said, of course, and I wasn't talking about social media philosophy like in general, but number one, like the videos I criticized, they're kind of obviously, I think obviously not good. This video on Kant by Philosophy Tube, I think it's from a philosophical perspective, it's simply bad. I only watched like 2 or 3 of them. Maybe they have others that are very good. I have no clue. I'm not saying the channel is in general very bad. I'm only talking about this specific video. But of course, the point that I was trying to make, and you made this point earlier in our conversation tonight, is the effort that is put on the presentation instead of on the interpretation. and particularly the effort that is put on the presenter. And again, this is something that mirrors what I said earlier about the talent shows, right? Where somehow the judges become the stars rather than the performers. And so where we have this second order observation thing. So what this video channel, at least tendentially, does is putting more emphasis on the coolness of the presentation and on the observation of the philosophical text than on the philosophical text itself. So we have a similar thing here, which we have in a different form also in academia, but in social media, it's maybe particularly evident and maybe particularly problematic that we have this extreme emphasis on profile curation of the host of the show.
Yes. You will also show how you feel the need to, put yourself first in the video.
Well, I intentionally, and this is also similar to Daoism, I try to be self-ironic, right? I mean, I try to problematize this very fact, right? And I try to also not take myself overly seriously as a YouTuber, and try to reflect on the ambiguity of the medium and of its structure as much as possible. So that's an intention of the channel, and that's also why we intentionally keep the production quality pretty low, and we intentionally have like corny fonts and thumbnails from time to time, right? I want the video to reflect, to show, to not hide that it's a YouTube video. I don't want to make it fakely like overly academic or so. It's on fucking social media, right? And that's obvious, right? So, and that is something that the video, and that's also why whatever, and in another level, we have this like with a warning at the beginning and so forth, right? So that is intentional. Of course, it very openly communicates thereby the ambiguity of being a YouTube production.
And your audience, do you think they have catched that message?
Yes, I do. I think largely they do. Yes.
Like, how do you make a video? Like a normal, typical video. Like, how do you do it? How do you think about it? What's your process? Your creative process?
It's very simple. It's very simple. Basically, I think of a topic, or we think of a topic, and then I prepare and I make notes. And then we meet in my office, and he has a simple camera, and I just do it basically as I do in class. I just speak from my notes. I look at my notes. The notes are on my screen, so you can see me also constantly looking at the screen. But it's not scripted, as you said. It's just I'm talking on the basis of notes. We also have like 2 or 3, but I say this at the beginning, that are fully scripted, and then I just read the script. But these are shorter and just like 2 or 3. The majority is I just talk on the basis of my notes directly into the camera. Then Fai, who is the producer, he edits this. I don't know what he does. He does that. And he adds images to it, right? Then I usually check the images. Once or twice I didn't check, and there was some problems, so I have to make sure I check the images thoroughly. So before it's actually posted, I check it, and I especially look at the images. Minor things. It's not nothing, but I have to be, because now there are lots of viewers. So anyway, so just I have to make sure the images are not like really odd. Usually he does an excellent job in selecting the images. He always posts them on Wednesdays. I don't know why. He told me like they have to be posted on Wednesday evening. Best time to post them. I don't know why. We are trying to do like every 2 weeks Wednesday we're trying to upload. I'm not sure if that will be possible in the long run.
And have you felt any difference emotionally when you perform in your camera? For example, your first videos, if I remember, you look like very carefree, but your last videos, you are better dressed, better your hair.
Wow, that's interesting. I do feel I do feel more self-conscious, so I feel less relaxed now than before. But it also has a lot to do with my personal mood. Yeah, sometimes at some videos I was actually surprised because I was in a very bad mood, and then still I managed through editing to make it kind of not really, couldn't really feel that I had been in such a bad mood in the beginning, because I thought no one was watching. Right now I know that people are watching, so that makes obviously a difference.
And people in academia, how have them reacted to your videos?
Good question. Not at all, basically, and I'm wondering if it will actually have a bad effect on my academic profile. I think there's a distinct possibility that this will have a bad effect on my academic profile.
Why, Jesus?
Yeah, because people then might say, this guy is kind of, trying to be very popular and not really doing the traditional solid academic work. That's right, and he's just talking to the regular people and instead of addressing the academic circles also. So I think there's a distinct possibility that people will not be, just like Zizek or so.
He's talking to the poor.
Yeah, I mean, Zizek is not really an accepted academic philosopher. Yeah, and so that's a danger that I'm aware of, and we'll see how that goes.
What are the similarities and differences between your YouTube self and your academic self?
I'm also thinking about this. So far, I feel better with my YouTube self actually than with my academic self. The YouTube self is somehow more experimental. It's less it's less forced by the academic conventions. So I can operate more with humor, for instance, than this is possible in an academic context. And so, yeah, I like this YouTube format so far. But then the downside is that, then you have to publish something like every 2 weeks or so, and then also. Of course, this is, of course, the Profilicity thing, right? You're always, it takes up a lot of time. And so I, for instance, intentionally in the past few days, I did not look at any reactions to my videos. I thought I shouldn't look at it for at least a few days.
Why?
So it takes up too much time and too much, you get a little bit too obsessed with it. I wanted to read a book instead. Again, because you're much too more it's also an obsession with yourself somehow, right? You're seeing, it's like looking into the mirror all the time. It's like if you look into the mirror all the time, and I think that's somehow, at least for me, it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable? Why?
I don't know. I don't like looking into the mirror. I don't like seeing myself too much.
No, it happens. When, for example, I make my videos, I have to edit myself, And after you spend hours and hours editing your own face, you start becoming crazy.
Yes, and that's so good for me, right? Because Phi does all the editing. I don't even know how to edit. He does all the editing. So that's also good. I have nothing to do with the editing.
What are your next projects, and where can we find your work?
Well, just, I don't really have a specific book project. So my main project now is indeed these two YouTube channels. So I will be working on and with them in the near future. And I'm also thinking to do the same stuff that we are doing right now and that you are doing, maybe to talk with other people. And to invite other people to have a conversation. I think that's a good format, and I might do that as well.
You should invite Zizek.
Yes, that would be great, but I'm afraid he won't. I need at least maybe 2 or 3 more million views until he would consider coming on the show.
No, I've seen Zizek in relatively small podcast.
All right. Yeah.
One that is called Low Society, I think.
All right. Yes, 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 yes. They wanted to talk to me too, but then unfortunately that didn't work out. Yes. But yeah, I'm trying to do the kind of things that we are doing now. That might be a next step. We'll see.
It will be great. And your book, we can get it on.
If you buy it through the Columbia University Press website and use the promo code CUP20, you get 20% off, if I remember correctly. But it's also in the book launch video. There's a promo code you can buy. And yeah, but I guess you can also get it through other channels, whatever. Of course, I'd be happy if people would take a look at it. Thanks.
Yeah. I was actually looking in Library Genesis.
Yeah.
And they don't have your book. They have other books of you, but they don't have that. And I'm like, well, I wait.
Yeah, that's pretty new. That's why they don't have it yet, I guess. Eventually it's going to be there. Thank
you for your time with this interview. This was actually been a very entertaining interview. I haven't had an interview like that in months. So thank you.
Thank you.
And remember, we all are the Crystal generation. Y recuerden que todos somos la generación de cristal. I always do this when I end the video, so